I was born in Dover, Delaware, a sort of Depression children. My parents were very humble people, no big profession or anything like that, and they didn't work out. The family situation just didn't work out. So by the time I was 3 years old, the family had really broken up, and 3 of us were actually placed in the care of the state of Delaware. We were wards of the state, became foster children. My brother, twin brother, and I, thankfully, were not separated, which was just great. So we were friends all the way through our life together as long as he lived, and in a way, we still are. And another brother, my brother Norman, we left and went to a foster home in Newark, Delaware, and then another foster home, and another foster home. And eventually, the 2 of us, Floyd and I, my brother's name is Floyd, that's another thing my mother did to us. And we came to Wilmington. And we ended up with James and Mary Hodges. Our foster parents were smart enough to tell us to call them aunt and uncle. And they made certain that there was some kind of ongoing relationship with my mother. And of course, even we would go to Dover about 2 weeks out of every year, and Floyd and I would actually go and see our father as well. So we were a family that had some kind of connection, even though we'd had this breakup early on in our life. I think one of the best things that happened to me, looking back, is becoming a ward of the state and moving from Dover to Wilmington and to live in the city of Wilmington. I won't try to look back and make it sound like it was everything, because it was very difficult growing up in Wilmington, Delaware, during that time of extreme segregation. On the other hand, I was growing up in a village. Didn't really realize the extent to which our community was so close-knit. There were so many support systems that just followed us and supported us and held us up. Church, school, the Y, I could just go on and on and on. And I don't think we thought, hot dog, we live in a village, you know what I mean? It was just an experience. It's just the way it was. It was just wonderful looking back. Other people's parents could discipline you and call you out if you're doing something wrong. The one that sticks in my mind is when I was cutting up somewhere, somebody would stop me and say, "Ain't you Mary's boy?" But the thing, imagine what that's like. It's just marvelous. When we were going to number 29 school, we lived at that time on 9th Street, East 9th Street, and number 29 was at 12th and Poplar, so it wasn't that long a walk, and we'd walk to school. We'd always stop on the way home to Dr. Smith's to pick up something. And my brother Floyd, who is not here to defend himself, so I can blame it on him, decided that we should steal a package of Choke Charlies. And so he did, or we did. And we quickly left Dr. Smith and we started eating the Choke Charlies. And by the time we got home, which wasn't that far from Dr. Smith, we were still chewing on Choke Charlies. And Aunt Mary said, have you boys, were you at Dr. Smith's? Did you steal some crackers? No, he says. And of course, Dr. Smith had probably called home. He did call home and said, "Mary, those boys stole a pack of crackers." And so, you know, we were punished. But that was the tightness of the network. You could be relied on to be called out, but you could also be relied on to be supported, to be loved by the adults in our community. It was a great time to grow up. I loved it. Again, I don't know that I or any of us realized what a great education we were receiving. What a great academic institution we really were a part of. And nor did we, I don't believe, understand fully the outcome of that experience until later in our lives, as we went to other places and realized how much we learned and how much we'd experienced in that school. Very segregated, so segregated that the textbooks we used were hand-me-downs from the other white public schools in Wilmington, with the nameplates still on the front cover inside of the book, with the names of the students going back maybe a decade. Says a lot about how resources were shared for public education then, and perhaps even now, in a way. But anyway, in spite of that, we had teachers, most of whom, especially at Howard, had been prepared in some of the greatest academic institutions, universities and colleges in this country. But in Delaware, what were they going to do with it? They were going to teach at Howard High School. That's it. That was the show. C. Gwendolyn Redding, Sadie Jones, my goodness, Mademoiselle Bowser, Mrs. Pendleton, of course, Mr. Andrews, the great musician, known all over this region as one of the finest orchestra leaders, a great teacher of Clifford Brown's, by the way, but a choral leader. At the height of his career at Howard and my being there, we actually traveled around the city as a choir singing at some of the greatest events in the city of Wilmington, in the city hall, the other city hall, and other places. So Hotel DuPont, I could just go on and on and on. And so we benefited from all of those people. I can tell you one example. When I was later in the Army and found myself in Europe and seeing places and art and things that I'd heard about and learned about in high school. When I came back from the Army and went to the University of Delaware, I know I'm skipping ahead, but one of the things that I realized was that I wasn't a brilliant student, but that so much of what I had in English 101 and French 101, I had had at Howard High School in grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. So it was really just great. I could say this in all honesty, the Walnut Street Y was the father figure for me and so many boys, especially in the boys department. There was a boys department. George Taylor was the secretary of the boys department. Just a wonderful, wise, smiling, but he would chew you out in a minute kind of a guy, you know what I mean? And Forrester Lee, just a great phys ed teacher, and just all of these people made the Y a gathering place for us. It wasn't just a place for working out and that sort of thing. It was a true gathering place. It was a culture center for the community. A lot of the programs that are now held in many different auditoria and places around the city were held and could only be held at a place like the Y or some church somewhere. So it was a culture center, it was phys ed, it was great for boys and girls even, because the YWCA actually shared a part of that space. We went to various kinds of programs, lectures. Mario Greco was our leader. He was a Greek person who lived in Wilmington, Delaware, who volunteered at the Walnut Street Y, and he was our mentor, so to speak. And he would take us on tours, hikes, and even visit other houses of worship. It's sort of what began to broaden my own interest in spirituality and things spiritual, because of that experience of being able to experience the way people worship Jews or Catholics or Greek Orthodox, or, you know what I mean? Just sort of experiencing it was, and Episcopalians too. That's how I learned about the Episcopal Church, by the way, by by that being in that junior high Y class and going to St. Matthew's for the first time. Camp Brown, and I think it was probably named for, I'm just guessing, but I'll bet you it was H. Fletcher Brown, who was a philanthropist. And so Camp Brown, and I have to tell you, I think it was somewhere in Brandywine 100, but I don't remember that now. I just remember that it was a big sort of jungle-like place where we were taught how to swim by being thrown into the water. I remember that. That turned me so far away from swimming, I didn't really learn to do that till many years later. But it was a great experience. I remember being initiated there. You know, we were forced to eat worms, which is really spaghetti in cold water, but we were blindfolded, so we didn't know. And we had this song that I've been trying to conjure back up, something like, these words won't make sense, but something like, Ki-yike-yike-us, nobody's like us. We are the boys from Camp Brown, always a winning, always a grinning, always a feeling fine, or something like that. Anyway, isn't that ridiculous? I can still remember that. I can hardly remember my middle name, but I can remember that. The Y was, it just did everything for us. We had not only our clubs and worship experiences and cultural things, but the bowling alley was there. I became a pin boy when I was very young, and I was able to jump alleys my alley was alley 3. There were only 4 alleys. My alley was alley 3, but when there were tournaments, matches, I learned how to jump alley so I could set pins in alley 3 and then jump alley 4. It was really quite nice. But also at the Y was, Trocadero, which was a kind of a high school gathering place for dances, and it's just everything. It just was everything. I was baptized, and my mother is AME. But my foster parents went to Mother AUMP Church, which was right where the Peter Spencer Plaza is now. So that's the first place where I really recall a church experience. But they were not every Sunday Christians, and so it was really, except when we were going to Sunday school, which we did for a time. We didn't go often. But I have to tell you, there are a lot of clergy in my family, and I really got bitten by that spirituality bug early in my own life. The Vacation Bible School was held at Mount Carmel Church, which was at 10th and Lombard, or at Ezion, which was at 9th and French, or Bethel at 6th and Walnut. And so we would, every summer, it would be at one of those places, 2-week Vacation Bible School. Many of our teachers, I mean school teachers, were the teachers in Bible school, or parents, or other grown-ups in our sphere. So again, we never were very far away from home. It's an incredible experience. I think I joined the Army because isn't that what everybody did? You know, my brother had gone to the Marine Corps about 6 months or so before. But I joined the Army, and at a time when you could enlist for 3 years, and you could choose your MOS, your military occupational specialty. And for some reason, I think it was because I'd been thinking about priesthood, I thought, as I read the list, neuropsychiatric specialist is what I would want to do. Now, I didn't know at that time exactly what that meant. I later discovered that it was being an attendant or an orderly in a mental hospital. But I learned a lot, and I eventually, not right away, when I first went in, I was just like every other soldier. I had to go through basic training and all that. I still remember that second day when I woke up at Fort Meade, Maryland, saying, what am I doing here? It was incredible that I had chosen this. You know, not very athletic, not very, here I am in the Army. But anyway, I came to really like my military experience. It was clear even before I went to the Army, while I was still in high school, my desire for priesthood really continued to grow. Even when we were at Howard, we used to have a lot of us kids. Remember I told you about Father Wilson getting a lot of us? Well, a lot of us were right at Howard in the same class. So out on the playground sometimes, we would celebrate the Mass. Really, it was one of those times, that's what we did. That's sort of what defined us. But anyway, even when I went to the Army, I knew that's something I wanted to do. But I knew first I had to go to college. So I went to ask for some recommendations from people, including the principal, who said to me, well, I'm not sure I wanted to go to the University of Delaware. It's pretty clear to me where I wanted to go. He says, well, how about Brown Vocational? I remember being asked that question. And I remember I remember saying, no, absolutely not. I'm going to the University of Delaware. One way or the other, that's where I'm going. I'm not even sure why, except that that's where I wanted to go to school. I knew that Lenny had gone there, Lenny Williams, probably was the first black student. I may be wrong about that, but I think so, in 1952, because he went straight to college and played football for University of Delaware. Well, this was 1957 we're talking about. So anyway, I went. And as I told you before, I realized that although I wasn't brilliant, I had learned a lot of what was going to be expected of me to learn many years before. First of all, there weren't many of us around. I think there may have been 2 or maybe 3 in my class. Can you imagine that? And there weren't many black students on the campus. Most of the people we saw who were black were workers, either in the cafeteria or on the grounds and things like that. So that was difficult, and it was just difficult being, in a sense, judged just by who you are, by the color of your skin. And what was annoying sometimes was the fact that I'd been a veteran, and I'd come back really mature. I knew a lot. Didn't know everything, but I knew something. And I had to be around a lot of people who really weren't all that smart. But I knew that they probably were going to have a much better shake at life than I was going to have, just because of who they were. The privilege of being white, really, and all that implies. And that's something that you don't study. You just know that. That's something one feels in the bones, if you know what I mean. As I say, I was not a bookworm, and I enjoyed staying involved with St. Matthew's and being a part of the center and all of that, and other activities. But I was a reasonably good student, good enough to graduate and go to seminary. I went to Virginia Theological Seminary, and the same thing applied. There were 3 African Americans in my class, and I believe at the time there may have been one other one in the seminary at the time. Now, there had been other black students before, but never a large number. Now, when I read the catalogs and when I go back, I'm always impressed, as frankly I am even at Delaware, with even with how people may feel now. It's so much different from when I was there. It's almost not the same place. Well, the same thing is true with the seminary. But I can say this about seminary: it's where I met Jesus of Nazareth, as opposed to Jesus the Christ, who wears a crown and, like an emperor or something like that. But the real Jesus, the one who truly inspired what my priesthood was going to be. This is the Jesus who spoke truth to power. This is the Jesus who loved unconditionally, but hated injustice, and who fought for justice, who made people uncomfortable with truth. Not just to make people uncomfortable, but because he loved truth, because that's who he was. And to experience this human being who had such spiritual power, I thought, that's my guy. And that happened to me, it began to happen in my very first year in seminary. And it was not even the seminary that I wanted to go to. I actually wanted to go to General Seminary in New York, because that's the church, that's the seminary where Father Wilson had gone. And if you know anything about high church, low church, St. Matthew's Church was a very Anglo-Catholic, very high church, ceremonial. And Bishop Mosley, whom I adored, when I told him I wanted to go to General Seminary, he said, no, you're going to Virginia. We need to level some of this a little bit. This is going to do you good. Well, at first I really resented, who's he to tell me where to go to seminary? Well, he's your bishop, first of all. That's the first clue. But I went, and I tell you, again, it was exactly where I was meant to be, because I learned what I may not have learned at General Seminary, and that is the power of preaching. Preaching the gospel is as important as the celebration of the Mass, and that they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And so I came to love preaching. I still do. Don't think I do it as well now, but I still do. I had been asked to consider being a curate. That's the first job that anybody out of seminary gets. When you're a deacon, you're a curate. It really means gopher with a collar on, like a dog. So I was asked to come to St. Andrew's Church. The rector was Gordon Charlton, who was really very liberal politically and so on. And this was a white congregation, all white. St. Andrew's Church at 8th and Shipley. And I told Bishop Mosley came down to visit the seminarians from Delaware, and he came to me and said, well, Lloyd, what are you going to do about Gordon's invitation? I said, well, Bishop, I'm thinking about it, but I'm not sure. He says, well, Lloyd, I'm going to have to tell you this. In Delaware, it's either there or it's nowhere. I had no other choice. That's where I was going. Now, that doesn't mean that there were not vacancies where a curacy could be available, just not for me at that time. And he was just being very honest. So that made me say, oh, okay. So I came to St. Andrew's Church. And I'm telling you again, it was God sent. It was where I was meant to be. The first thing is that Gordon Charlton wrote a letter to the parish announcing my coming. And the first thing he said in there of substance was, and Lloyd Casson is not coming simply to be a priest for black people or to attract black people. He will be a priest to all of us. That was tremendous. The second thing is he was very unthreatened in his own position. So he required of me to go to vestry meetings with him, to be a part of the parish. So although my job was what a curate's job always is, Christian education, summer camp, that sort of thing, I was actually learning and growing. He's the first person, by the way, who said to me, you would be a great preacher if you put that manuscript away. And so at early services, I would start just reading the scriptures and then just extemporaneously speaking, and that's how I became, started growing in my ability to preach. I was at St. Andrew's from 1964. I was ordained a deacon, by the way, at St. Matthew's. That's interesting. I asked if I could be ordained at St. Matthew's to the diaconate, and so I was, even though I was on the staff of St. Andrew's. But I served St. Andrew's, became the associate rector eventually. I was there for 5 years. I left in 1969. And guess where I went? Home. I was asked by Bill Young, my 7th grade teacher in social studies, who was the senior warden of St. Matthew's, the parish where I'd grown up, if I would, Bishop Primo, then Father Primo, had been called to a parish in Detroit and asked if I would come and be their rector. I thought about it and I thought, I will. So I did. And that was interesting. I will say this, there was something else going on. While at St. Andrew's, a lot of things were going on in the country. The country was becoming totally upset over the racial issues, discrimination and segregation in this country. The fires were beginning to burn. And I found myself a leader in the community, not because I decided I was going to be a leader in the community, but I just was in a position, being involved with the NAACP, with Fair Housing Council and things like that, to know, and I grew up here, so I knew the place. And so I began to speak about it, speak out about it, and got invited to Tower Hill and other schools and to other congregations, even Roman Catholic churches and so on. So always I'd become highly visible in the community as a person who was concerned about justice for all people and a breaking down of racial barriers and so on. Frankly, I think I became obsessed with the idea of reconciliation. It became almost a theme. It's sort of weak. It became a part of my DNA to say sort of the Rodney King thing. Can't we all just get along?
Can we all get along? Can we get along?
Except I didn't say it in exactly that way. So anyway, I went to St. Matthew's Church. By then, Dr. King had been assassinated. Wilmington had really been, we've been experiencing our own trauma, occupied by troops for 9 months during that period of time, and others joining others in the struggle to get the guard off the street and bring some normalcy to Wilmington. I had a card that enabled me during that period of time to be on the streets during a curfew, where most people, especially if you were black, had to abide by and were off and had to be off the streets after a certain time. John Connor, who was then probably the first Newcastle County exec, I think I may be right about that, I may be wrong, but I had pulled together an organization, called it the Biracial Coordinating Committee, where Mayor Babiarts, John Connor, H.B. DuPont, and several others, and myself were sort of like almost every day meeting to see where things are and what should we be doing and all that sort of thing. And so as a result, you know, John Connor gave me the privilege of walking the streets during this curfew, and I had to have a card to show it. Leadership was difficult in those days. We were, especially if we were involved in institutions that were not just black. We were Uncle Toms in the black community and black militants in the white community. So we walked this tight rope. It was an incredible rope to walk. So I go to St. Matthew's with all of that, and in parish where I'd grown up, which has its own complications. But it was a good time. I loved being at St. Matthew's. I loved being home in my own community. And I loved being Father Casson in my own community, identifying with that community and loving it and wanting only the best for it. While there, talk about influence, I was appointed to the Board of Education by then Governor Peterson. So on the board, I was, of course, one of the bosses of more than half of my congregation, because most of them were teachers and school administrators and so on. So that was another tightrope I was walking, really. It was a learning experience, first of all, because I had no knowledge of what was going on in the educational sphere outside of a classroom, and for me as a student. So, and just knowing people who were involved. So I had to learn a lot about the system. I was aware, because of the problems, the issues that people were facing that I've already described, that brought about the unrest and so on, that obviously affected our students as well. And so that was a difficult time. Parents were angry, students were often angry, you know what I mean? And it was a time when the demands were being placed on the school district to really start addressing issues that black people in particular were affected by. It was not always easy with the superintendent at the time, who I think was not sensitive to all these things. He eventually left, by the way. But also it was difficult convincing the people in the black community that we're with you, we're not your enemy, because that's how they'd seen the school system, as their enemy. By then, all those schools were still racially segregated. They were not. This was not discrimination. I mean, what I'm trying to say is the schools were open. There were black and white students in the various schools, even though the numbers may not have been acceptable. So that was going on. All the talk about desegregation was beginning to happen, and all that implied. And I remember my own distrust with some of that conversation, if I could just be honest about that. Because I began to sense that whether an education was quality or not needed to be white. And I felt that somehow that's what was being said. My concern was quality education for all students wherever they happen to be, and not to require our students, our youngest, to bear the full burdens on their backs of a racist society. They don't have anything to do with the fact that this is where they live and that their parents can't work and live somewhere else. So to attempt to redesign a school system almost artificially, where the kids would have this experience, it might be a great experience, it wasn't all that good, by the way, all the time, and then come back into their own place where they are then again given the same old definition of who they were before they went to the school. Not only that, but when they went to those schools, there were many teachers who didn't really understand them, did not expect much from them, and therefore did not demand much, did not teach to a student with the idea that the student was going to grow and learn. We had a crisis because when Dr. Geiser left, I was the president of board, and I was attempting to make sure that the community were involved in decisions affecting the school's life. So I had some town meetings set up in which I asked parents and others from the community at large to come to these meetings and say to us, what do you think should be the direction of our schools? And what kind of leader do you think we should have? Fair enough. But what most people, particularly in the black community, wanted was a particular person to be the superintendent. He happened to be Dr. Earl Jackson of Bancroft Junior High, who was a member of my parish as well. But the board had to go through a process. We weren't going to just appoint somebody. So we set up a process. We hired a consultant to help us to choose. And we came down to, as our candidate of choice, Thelma Johnson, who had been a teacher and administrator in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And based on our interviews with her and so on, she was going to be very different, very demanding, black woman. But she was going to bring something very good to our schools. Well, the community felt differently. They really wanted Dr. Jackson. And so, to make a long story short, school was out for 2 or 3 days while people demonstrated and so on. And ultimately, even though we appointed her officially in a meeting, she then had a press conference, which we facilitated, where she actually withdrew. And Dr. Jackson was appointed the superintendent. It was shortly after then, by the way, that I actually left Wilmington. This was 1972, and I left to take a job in New York shortly thereafter. I went first to Trinity Church, and I was a bureaucrat, really, in charge of all the congregations that belonged to Trinity Parish. My office was 74 Trinity Place, right down at Wall Street. The mother church is the Wall Street, Trinity Wall Street, which everybody knows about, I think. Then I was there for 4 years. My major job there was to make those congregations independent parishes. Then I went to Washington Cathedral, where I spent 10 years. Great 10 years. I'd love to talk about that and all that implies. Then I came back to New York to be the assistant dean of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Then I went to be the vicar of Trinity Church, the mother church and St. Paul's Chapel. Then I went to be the social justice officer for the Episcopal Church and the priest in charge of St. Mark's Church in the Bowery. Then I came back to Wilmington in 1997 with a great job of beginning or finishing what I started. I had started with St. Andrew's, then went to St. Matthew's. So this job was to bring these two congregations together, the Episcopal Church of Saints Andrew and Matthew as it exists today. I'm so proud of that. That to me is a crowning achievement, to have been the leader as that congregation was developing.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
My brother Norman went to California, where he developed, among other things, wire harnessings for B-2 bombers and other things like that. It was during that time that he was in charge of the spacecraft checkout division for the Apollo space program. He was literally in charge. He was the one who finally said, "Yep, it can go," which I think's pretty good. And as a matter of fact, I was surprised once when I was down at Smithsonian Institute and saw my brother in a hard hat in a kind of a cardboard something or other, like a statue kind of thing, which was part of a space exhibition. It was at the Smithsonian, and to see my brother there was quite something.